Dad, you'll never understand me. Mom, give me some space. I think you should stop smoking weed. Sweetie, I don't know how to tell you this, but it's just not working out. Annoying people exist within our life, and sometimes there's very little that we do about it except for let that relationship continue. There are ways to change these relationship dynamics. Stay tuned to find out with these 4 tips. Whether it's a father who just doesn't get you, or a mother who is a little bit too overprotective, or a friend that drags you down and just remains a toxic element in your life, whoever it is, there are annoying people in your life. I get it. But there are also ways to deal with it. And a lot of these techniques or methods primarily have to do with us. Tip number 1. Know your sensitivities. Know what actually triggers you. What is a trigger? A trigger is an emotional escalator. Basically, you can think of the things that make you angry, the things that make you anxious, the things that could possibly make you low in your feelings, sad even. These things need to be fully understood by you. There are a lot of sensitive areas in a human being's life, and it's up to us to really know and understand that and become wise towards these things. For example, are you the type of person to be triggered or escalated when somebody throws an insult or slur your way? You need to understand why that is a potential trigger for you. Do you have an issue with shame? Do you have an issue with self-confidence? And is your reaction to become aggressive and defensive? Do you have concerns regarding public spaces? Why? It's not just social anxiety, because everyone's social anxiety is a little bit different. Do you fear that you might get hurt by a random stranger? Are you worried about how people are judging you, thinking that you're ugly and unattractive? Again, knowing your sensitive areas is you swallowing that self-honesty pill and actually looking in the mirror and say, I'm afraid because of ... Understanding your sensitivities. It's not going to be an easy journey. And some recommendations that I have towards this is to start journaling. Write down your daily habits and routines. Write down the things that made you escalated and the things that made you feel low, and utilize maybe a week, a month worth of entries as a reflection tool to see how changes in your mood were influenced from your environment. Possibly you're going to be able to find themes, and from these themes, you might be able to understand yourself a tad bit better. But without that mindful awareness, without that self-awareness, you are always going to be susceptible to the world and all its elements, including the people who don't control your emotions, but they influence them. Notice I said they do not control your emotions. This is very important for you to take note of. Because in tip number 2, you must practice using I feel statements. What is an I feel statement? It's quite simple. I feel an emotion because of a behavior. Once again, I feel an emotion because of a behavior. You must take accountability for your emotions. If you do not take accountability for your emotions, who will take accountability for your behaviors that are driven from your emotions? I feel anger because you did not call me last night. It's okay to say that I'm angry. It's okay to tell people how I feel. I feel annoyed because you keep on asking me for money. I feel afraid when you go out with your friends and you do risky things. I feel. This is not about the other person. This is about you taking full acknowledgement of what is going on within you. If you are not taking acknowledgement of your own emotions, then your behaviors that follow suit will be your fault. And yes, at that point in time, accountability is forced down your goddamn throat. But until that point, we must recognize that we can stop every wrongdoing, every wrong action, every hurt and pain that we can perform towards the world around us by just focus on how we feel. Now, dealing with annoying people means that other people are influencing how we feel. So how do we start to get into the habit of shutting that down? Well, we practice this 1 assertive communication statement and I feel statements. This 1 assertive communication technique in I feel statements. I feel this emotion because of this behavior. Again, it's not about the other person. It's not even about them recognizing what's happening with your emotions. It's about you recognizing what's happening with your emotions because of somebody else's behavior. If they choose not to understand that, if they find it hard to understand, if they laugh at you, if they shame you because of you being brave enough to communicate how you feel, that's a very telling story. But believe it or not, that's beyond the point. Tip number 3. Although other people may have an issue with this, and they only have an issue with this because it's a skill they haven't practiced. They are unskilled in this particular characteristic, I want to call it, which is empathy. Practice empathy. Practicing empathy will allow you to put yourself in the shoes of another person so that you're able to see things from their perspective and feel things from their perspective. If your father is nagging you, getting at you, telling you you need to do better in life and everything of the sort, then yes, the first thing that happens to me is that I get defensive, I get frustrated, I get in a little bit of a retaliation mode. But that's not helping anybody. Why don't I give myself the option to actually just see what they may be seeing? Why are they saying these things about me? Because it might be for a valid reason. But in understanding that reason, know that it might not have everything to do with you. Usually people care the most and express the most emotion towards things that they are fearful towards for themselves. For example, if a father was yelling at a kid, telling him he needs to come home at 9 o'clock at night, I don't like the idea of you staying out late. Well, I completely understand that from the father's perspective because things can happen at night that involve danger, that involve risk. But to the kid, I want independence and I want freedom. But, if we were to talk about the difference of our overall desires and wants, but try to find some mutuality, at least in our understanding, then that helps the relationship. But the yelling, you don't know me, Dad, or the father saying, you are stupid, son, this doesn't help anybody. That just creates disconnect. But when we practice empathy, we're choosing to connect. Empathy can be utilized with that I statement that I mentioned earlier. I feel this emotion because of this behavior. But also, when you are not the one that is speaking to your annoying person, you can also use empathy to listen. The biggest mistakes that human beings make is that we listen with the intent to respond. And that is why we always find ourselves in arguments and conflicts without an end to them. Cyclical. That's our fault, guys. Because when we listen, we must listen openly, attentively, and willingly. Not building my response because I want to win this argument. When you're talking about conversations, dysfunctional interactions with the people that you may care about, but just so happen to be annoying in your life, then at some point in time, you're going to have to be willing to not only drop the sword, but drop the shield too. The shield is very heavy, but that's your defense. And your defenses are going to drive you to picking that sword right back up and readying yourself in arms. But you got to be willing to drop both of those things. And empathy is not you just making assumptions towards how somebody may be thinking or feeling. It's not you trying to build a rationale in your mind. The best way that we can practice empathy is to ask somebody, hey, what are you thinking or what you're feeling? That's literally the best way. Unless you are very socially perceptive, and remind yourself that your thought process is prone to cognitive distortions, especially if you are stressed. Cognitive distortion is a warped way of thinking, meaning that you might rationalize to yourself something that is completely inaccurate. However, if you are brave enough, if you're the brave one in this conversation to tell the person that you feel this particular emotion because of what they did, or ask them how do they feel in regard to what they're doing to you, connecting through the language of feelings rather than the language of thoughts and opinions, then you're getting right to the root of your situations and more specifically your difference, the root to your difference of opinion. You deserve that much, don't you? The annoying person in your life is only annoying because we lack the ability to find mutual understanding with this thing that causes dysfunction in our life. Tip number 4, set boundaries. Boundary setting is hugely important. And what is a boundary? Well, boundary setting comes off of an I statement. I feel this emotion because of a behavior. we can also include requests with this. I feel frustrated when you come in late at night. Can you try to come in a little bit earlier? What we're doing here is very simple and direct. I feel an emotion because of a behavior. Then I offer a request. How I feel needs to be represented here, not how I think. I think that you should come in a little bit earlier, son, because, well, you're gonna get hurt and, the police are gonna arrest you and yada, yada, yada. All of these are my fears, and I don't necessarily share my fears with another individual. These are my fears. Now, if I throw that on another individual, it's gonna be thrown right back into my face, because I can't control someone else's life. I cannot control someone else's behaviors, but I can bring to the surface the stuff that can only help bring us together, which is your emotion. Your emotion is shared amongst you and another individual. Everyone knows what it feels like to feel angry, to feel sad, to feel jealous, to feel disappointed, to feel fearful, to feel anxiety, to feel whatever emotion it may be. It's very important to recognize that one of the most simple ways that we connect with other individuals is to just communicate our feelings, guys. A boundary in itself is not going to draw a distance between you and another individual. A boundary is about building understanding. I can't make that clear enough. Too much times do we see boundary as me here and another person over there, and a wall being built right in between us. That is not a boundary. A boundary is me communicating how the behavioral actions of somebody else is negatively impacting my life, and I make a request towards them to, of course, change that behavior. And maybe it has very little to do with them changing their behavior, but me changing the way that I interact with them. So let's throw out an example over there with our bonus tip number 5. Manage your environment. This is my favorite coping technique because it's a very preliminary approach to being able to manage a lot of the stresses in your life. Managing your environment is identifying the people's, places, and things that make you feel escalated. This brings us right back into tip number 1, understanding your sensitivities. If there's a certain place, if there's a certain person, whether it be my cousin, my brother, my lover, that might be toxic towards me, and I have the option to walk away from it, or maybe frequent it less, or maybe have it involved in my life to a lesser degree, then I must take on that option. There's such a thing called sacrifice, and sacrificing the things that we feel that we need to hold on to, such as our obligations towards somebody else, just because we are their friend, just because we are their parent, just because we are their lover, just because we are their, whatever word you want to use, whatever relationship dynamic you may have with somebody else. Recognize this, that in some way, shape, or form, everyone needs to be self-interested at some point in time, especially if you're talking about developing yourself and, of course, improving yourself. Finding that emotional well-being so that you can be a healthier individual means that you gotta stop allowing the dynamics of your life to continue to tell you that you need to do things that are outside of the things that you actually need to do. You don't need to keep hanging around with that friend if all they do is influence you to do risky things in your life. You don't need to be just sitting there listening to your parents shame and blame you. If you can start to stand up for yourself using assertive communication and I feel statements. You don't need to be felt like you are a burden in a relationship from somebody else because that other person has problems with their self-esteem and they're putting you down over and over and over again. You don't need to, of course, allow somebody else to affect you to the degree that you have in the past. But if that's the case, then if we were choosing to set boundaries, if we were choosing to practice empathy, if we were choosing to use I feel statements, if we were choosing to understand our sensitivities, us not only using these skills in the moment of a lack of stability, moment of escalation, moment of anger, frustration, fear, depression, not just using them as coping mechanisms, but also taking the preliminary approach to manage the things that are actually going to influence toxicity in our life. I'm not saying that you have to move out of your parents' house at 16 years old just because they don't get you as a teenager. I'm not saying that you have to end your 20-year long marriage to your spouse. I'm not saying that you have to do these things. But ask yourself, what leads you into dysfunction in the first place? I think in relationships, it has a lot to do with secrecy, a lack of transparency, and a lack of emotional self-awareness in each individual. You are a product of your environment, but you can change your environment by choosing to change the way that you think you need to act and feel, and becoming a lot more honest with yourself in that regard. Instead of being a coward, instead of being afraid of communicating what's going on with you, you must rise to the occasion and be brave. Because although your feelings are something that you may not even want to look at, bringing this to the surface in your relationships can only help form a better, healthier foundation of understanding and compassion. At the end of the day, though, you have to make a choice for yourself. Is this annoying person worth it to keep around? And if not, please stay mindful. Before you move on, remember to go ahead, subscribe, share, comment down below, and like this video for more content that's focused on guided meditations, open topic discussions, or educational workshops. And please always come back to visit the detail. Ramon Phipps.